Hey, everybody. Looks like we're back. The third thing to consider before writing a novel series is what kind of series you're wanting to write in regards to, is it going to be episodic or is it going to be serial? And the other thing is, what kind of character arcs are you going to be presenting to the readers? It is a beautiful day in October. It is a Saturday, and I am deep in the woods. I hope I don't get shot by a hunter. So let's start with character arcs. Let's say let's say you're writing a trilogy, and in let's say your protagonist starts out like really cowardly. So they're scared. Um, they don't have any self confidence, but you want them to eventually become a hero, like this brave warrior. Okay, that's a nice classic arc. If in the first book the character's like a coward, but then defeats a few villains or whatever, overcomes his fears or her fears, and then becomes this brave hero by the end of the book. That's great. But what are you going to do for book 2 and 3? Because if your character has this nice arc in book 1 and then is just stagnant, book 2 and book 3, they don't change anymore, it can be pretty boring and you can lose readers that way. However, there is a risk that you have to consider when trying the alternative. Let's say you have a trilogy and your protagonist is a coward, or like a bad guy, whatever, in book 1. And by the end of book 1, the character has made some progress, but their arc isn't over. Once you get into book 2, that arc continues and they become a little braver, or they become a little better, a little more. Uh, they become more charitable. They become kinder, whatever. Then, as you reach book 3, the 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 finale of the trilogy, your character completes their arc, and they finally become a genuine good person, or they become a genuine brave hero who can defeat the bad guys. Right? That's a nice arc too. However, with this option, you're going to run into a problem where, let's say, the character is like real cowardly in book 1. Readers might read that and think, this character is a loser. I don't want to read a story about a loser. And then by the end of the book, it doesn't resolve, and they're just like, yeah, that's who this character is. The character's just a loser. They're just a scared little, you know, nobody. And so then they don't read on. Or maybe the character's a bad character. They're a villain who kills people and robs people and rapes people, whatever. And you're trying to tell this story about how this evil person has this awesome redemption. They started out real bad, but they eventually become a good person. If you do this over the series, well, then your readers might think, oh, well, when they get to the end of book 1, they might think, well, this character just isn't for me. I'm not really vibing with them. I just don't like them. They're a bad person. And then they stop reading. They don't read book 2 and 3, where the character keeps developing and becomes a better person. You could also do the opposite. So let's say your character is like really good. Maybe they're really brave, in book 1, and they're this awesome, super nice, good hero in book 1. And by the end of book 1, they're still a pretty good person, but they did like one little thing that was kind of bad towards the end, but they're still basically a good person. A reader might think, well, this character is boring. There's nothing really going on here. The character's not developing. I'm just going to stop reading. And then because they do that, they miss the fact that you're telling a tragedy story. This inverted arc where the character gets worse. They become a villain. They become a coward. They become scarred and traumatized by all these bad things. Maybe you're trying to tell the story where they start. It's like the story of a really good woman who was this wonderful inspiration to people, and then by the end of the trilogy, this woman is broken. She's just a terrible person. She has no friends and family. No one wants to associate with her. If that's the story you're going for, that's fine. But you have to consider what are the problems? What are the risks that you run into with each option? So, what's the solution? If writing a character arc in one book can lead to a stagnant character later on, and that's boring, and that could make you lose readers. And option two, you have this long arc that transcends over all the books, and that could push readers away because they're stupid and they don't understand that character arcs, can go on multiple books and a character can change over time. What do you do? Well, I don't have a specific answer for you. I'm just letting you know that depending on what you do, you could run into these problems. I guess you could say the best option would be to somehow find a middle ground between the two. So try to have some type of story arc, or sorry, character arc in book one. So maybe the character doubts themselves. And by the end of the book, now they kind of believe in themselves. And then as you get into book two, maybe that character arc continues or it slightly changes. Maybe you have a new character arc. Maybe the character learned to trust themselves, but they still can't trust others. And so in book two, they learn to trust other people. It's kind of like overcoming trauma or something. And then maybe in book three, the character finally becomes like the hero or whatever and is able to um, be selfless enough to make a sacrifice to save the princess or whatever. And you can do this with not just like your main character, but all the characters. You got secondary characters, and you want them to become good or bad or whatever. That really makes things better because then you don't have to worry about your audience is getting bored with just the one character arc. You've got multiple characters who are developing. You don't want your protagonist to have a really dynamic, rounded character. And then like the secondary characters and villain, like one trick ponies. You don't want them to be just stagnant, one dimensional robots. Maybe you want your villain to start out bad, but then they learn the error of their ways, and maybe it's like what's that trope called? Haters to lovers or something? Rivals to lovers. I can't remember what that thing's called. Obviously, you don't want the rival or villain to remedy the problems with your protagonist in book one, and then the other 2-3 books in your series, it's all resolved, and now they're just kind of living together. It just turns into like a contemporary novel series, just a little slice of life. What you would want to do is establish your villain as the villain in book number one, or the rival in book number one, or whatever. And then, let's say you're doing a trilogy, in book two, things start getting gray. The lines start to blur. And then by book three, that that character arc is completed and the villain or rival begins to see your protagonist as someone that they want to be friends with, or they want to become sexual partners with, or maybe they have to ally together to defeat some other enemy. So your character arc starts out with them two being, opposing sides, and then in book 2, a third entity shows up in the story, and suddenly you're like, "Oh no, what's going to happen?" And then by the end of book 2, it looks like your protagonist and antagonist are going to have to put their differences aside, and then that gets you hyped up in book 3. The protagonist and antagonist put their differences aside, join forces, and defeat the greater threat. But of course, this all boils down to the other thing that you have to consider: is your series going to be episodic or serial? So, what in the world is the difference between an episodic novel series and a serial novel series? I'm glad you asked. Let's talk about TV shows here for a second. Think about, let's say, South Park. Okay, so South Park, The Simpsons, stuff like Everybody Loves Raymond. I don't know, any of those kinds of shows, like sitcoms, whatever. These shows are episodic. What that means is you watch one episode, and then you have this mini arc in that episode, the story arc, and then that story ends. That episode ends. And when it ends, it's over. And then you go to the next episode. And when you get to the next episode, it's a whole nother adventure. Each episode is different. Each episode is a contained adventure. That's episodic. The alternative is a serialized series. And this is where the story continues episode to episode to episode, and each episode builds off of the last. This is where you get into like more mature stories. So I'm talking about stuff like Breaking Bad, Lost, Sons of Anarchy. Like these kinds of shows where there's an episode and something dramatic happens, and there's a mystery, there's a conflict, a plot, something's going on, and at the end of the episode, instead of everything being resolved, it's kind of left open ended to be continued. It makes you, the reader or the watcher, whatever the type of media it is, you have to come back to see the next episode in hopes of getting more answers. So, a simple way to understand the difference between episodic and serial is with episodic, it's the same characters, but a different story. With serial, it's the same story, but the characters can come and go. So in episode 1 or book 1, whatever, you have an introduction of a cast. Maybe a character dies off, and then that's it. You don't see him anymore. But then by episode 2 or episode 3, some other characters come in, but other characters die off. So let's say you've got a story about like an investigator, like a Sherlock Holmes kind of thing, Batman thing, and you have an established cast. You've got this investigator, or maybe a whole team of investigators, and then in book 1 they solve that mystery, and then in book 2 they solve another mystery, then in book 3 they solve another mystery, and it's the same format, copy pasted, and you just keep duplicating it over and over again. You figure out what works, and then you just keep pumping out new stories using that same blueprint. You could do this with like heroes or some type of horror thing with like a monster of the week sort of concept. So maybe your hero defeats a villain in book one, then they come up with a new monster to fight in book two, and then in book three, there's two monsters that you've got to beat at once. And you just keep, repeating the same cycle. Another thing you can have is like say vampires or something. So a series that's famous, I don't know if I can say famous. Maybe it's like secretly famous. That's a good way to put it, I think. A series that's secretly famous is Vampire Hunter D. This series has like 20, 30 books in it or something. It's still going. And that does like a monster of the week repetition kind of thing. The good guy shows up to a new place, meets a new group of people to help, and then he fights some vampires, some demons and monsters, saves the day, leaves town, and goes hunting for the next town to save. Rinse and repeat. So then you've got other types of books, other series where it's more serialized. And with these, you read book one, there's some drama, and then at the end of the book, there's some minor resolution, but it's not really complete. It's not the real end of the series. You're given basically a to be continued, and you have to get book two to see how the story continues to progress. You got to get book two to find out, who the thief was or who the murderer was. Or maybe you find out who it was at the end of book one, but then you don't get like the conclusion. Like, okay, we know who did it, but now what? You got to go to book two to get that answer. And then maybe then you don't get it. Maybe you find out, oh, they robbed the bank because a bigger bad guy told them to do it. And then that's the end of book two, and you got to go to book three to see the protagonist hunt down the big bad guy. It all really comes down to, what does your novel series need? If you want to do the episodic and that would work, go for it. If you want to do the serialized thing and have it all build and build until there's this big grand climax at the end of your series, then that's cool too. But again, with every option, you have your pros and cons. So if you do the episodic thing, then there will be some readers who might think book one is cool, but then they complete it and it's a complete self-contained story, and you're like, okay, well, that story's over. Why do I need to read book two? What more is there to add? So then they might not read it. Or if they do, then they think, oh, okay, I see. We're just regurgitating, everything that we did in book one, just with a slight twist. It's like, okay, I don't know if I want to read all that, to infinity and beyond. If you do the serialized thing, which is more standard, some people might not like it. They might think, okay, well, I'm tired of this cliffhanger, you know, like give me a solution or a resolution. I read this whole book. It was like 700 pages, and what do I have to show for it? The writer didn't give me anything. They completely left everything open ended, and now I'm compelled to go and buy book two to get the answers. And I know there's going to be a book three, so if I read book two, I still might not get the answers. So fuck, man, I don't know. Maybe I just won't read it. As with the topic concerning the character arcs, maybe the best thing to do is to try and find a bit of a mid ground between the two options. So maybe maybe you can find a way to come up with a blueprint for your story, so you can tell a story that works good for book one, and then you can kind of repeat it so that your readers get sort of like the same experience. It's a familiar experience in book two and book three, but there's enough of a change that it doesn't make it stale. It allows you to build off of it. And so you have a self-contained story in book one, so the reader feels like they've achieved something. They got something out of reading book one, but there is some open ends. There's some extra stuff hanging out there that could inspire readers to give book two. And so blending the two together, that was a good recipe for success that J.K. Rowling used with Harry Potter. So with the Harry Potter series, you get book one was its own thing, two was its own thing, three was its own thing, and four was its own thing. And then five, six, and seven is like this big finale trilogy. And that kind of ties back to what I was saying about serialized stories being more mature, whereas episodic is a bit more, for lack of better terms, immature. It's not really saying that it's immature, but it takes less focus, I guess, less attention to detail. Well, I think I'm going to end this video here. I still got to hike all the way down there and edit this video and get back to editing my novel series. Until next time, later.